Hello and welcome to The Cine Skinny, the film podcast from the team behind The Skinny magazine. It's Jamie Dunn here. Peter Simpson is off once again in a field somewhere listening to cool music. Or is he doing that? We're saying he's probably on the road now.
Yeah, I think he's in a car. Yeah, having a bad time. So it's okay.
So stuck it, Peter. So I'm hosting and I'm joined by Anna Heap-Rose and Ellie Robertson. Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi, Jamie.
How's it going?
Good. Okay, I think my headphones maybe are working.
That's good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
That's good. Are you all excited to vote on Thursday?
I was saying to Jamie Pettinger earlier, I keep forgetting that it's happening.
I know.
Yeah. Like, you guys also, like, I feel like the last election, I was so like, oh my God, like 3 days, 2 days, blah, blah, blah. And now I'm just like, oh yeah, I should remember to be like near my polling station. I mustn't forget.
Which is kind of my theory why the Tories might win. I think people might just forget to vote.
I think a lot of people would have to forget.
Yeah.
A lot of people.
I think there's a lot of people who are excited to vote.
Yeah.
Maybe people who have voted for the first time or something like that.
Maybe not anyone that we know.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's all very depressing. But, you know, what are we going to do?
What are we going to do, Jamie? Let's figure it out.
Start a new party. This isn't the Cine Skinny party.
Give up on electoral politics. The Cine Skinny, like little
like commune.
Revolutionary. yeah.
The Cine Skinny
anarchist cell.
Exactly. How to blow up a pipeline.
Right, let's do it. Before we get actually, I should apologise because while editing the podcast last time I hosted, I realised I forgot to give a shout out to the wonderful radio station in which we record these audio missives. So I just want to say a big thank you to Jamie Pettinger and the team at EHFM, because that's where we are today. We're back in Summerhall, and yeah, it's a really good radio station. You should listen to it. You can listen live at ehfm.live, I believe. And you should.
You should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Don't go to Glastonbury. Listen to the radio here. You know, hear better music, I would say. Yeah, Peter. What a waste of money. Just stay at home and listen to EHFM.
Well, he is going to, this is like a little plug that we can do, that EHFM are doing a bunch of stages at Kelvin, which is this coming weekend. So if people want to both be in a field and support EHFM, they can do that on this one weekend.
Now, will Coldplay drag on a beloved actor to sing to serenade them? This?
Did that happen at Glastonbury?
Yes.
Yeah. I saw Michael J. Fox was trending on Twitter and I had a heart attack.
They dragged Michael J. Fox. Why?
To sing Fix You at him, I believe.
I don't know. That can't be good.
Actually, it seemed to have been quite heartwarming. Maybe I'm just being a bitch, but it sounded awful to me. I didn't actually watch it.
Wait, no, actually, Coldplay. Okay, I have a connection. This is like, what is that game show? Like Only Connect or whatever. We have to like name the connection. In the episodes of Scrubs that Michael J. Fox guest starred in the third season, I believe, at the end of one of them, they play a Coldplay song. But it's not Fix You. It's like, I think it's one of the bonus tracks from Parachutes or something. So maybe that's why. Maybe that's like the one connection I can think of.
So that reunion happened at Glastonbury between Chris Martin and Michael J. Fox.
That's so nice.
I was like, why did they play some songs from Back to the Future? Because that's where Michael
Johnny Be Good.
Yeah, for example, that'd be cool.
Yeah, that would have been cool.
That would have been cool.
Oh, you should curate Glastonbury, Jamie.
What are we going to do? Okay, back to the show. On this week's show, we're going to be looking at two films that centre on gender-non-conforming characters. So we're looking at Orlando, My Political Biography, which is a playful essay film about trans identity from Spanish philosopher Paul B. Preciado, and Unicorns, which is a British drama about the relationship that forms between a straight mechanic from Essex and a drag performer from a conservative Indian family in Manchester. And off the back of these two films, we're going to end the show by considering some interesting trans and gender fluid films from film history. But first of all, as usual, what's everyone been watching? Has anybody got anything they've been watching over the last couple of weeks? We have been making a magazine over the last couple of weeks, so maybe we haven't.
We're making so many magazines. We actually need to make fewer magazines.
Exactly.
I have been watching... What did I watch? I think I've been watching like the usual amount of like... Oh no, actually I watched a really good TV show that wasn't Friends called Bad Sisters. Have you heard of it? It was like the Sharon Horgan one from a couple of years ago.
Yes, where they try and kill...
Yeah, the one sister's like horrible abusive husband.
Yeah,
it was really good. Really, really good. Really funny. Like 10 episodes. They're an hour each. I don't think they're planning a second season, so it just feels really, really contained. I love that. And then I also watched Sunset Boulevard for the first time with my brother, which I'd never seen before, which I really, really liked. I didn't realize, because I think most Billy Wilder that I've seen is more like the comedic-y sort of route. And I did not realize that it was like so noir.
Oh, yeah.
Like really, really baked in noir. I thought it would kind of have a bit more of a shift towards like the apartment style, but no, it was like very, very noir. I did really, really enjoy it. It is though one of those things, you know, when you watch something that has since become such a cultural touchstone that your main reference for it are all of the things that like satirize it.
Oh, yeah.
So the whole time that he was doing that voiceover, the only thing I could think of is that episode of Community where Chang is like the security guard and he's doing this weird like film noir thing and he's like in love with this like mannequin leg and then they set fire to it. That was the only thing that I could think of the whole time. So it did become a little bit funny.
I love that happens though when you see the well, I don't actually know if it's the first film where it's like you see a dead body and like they're pretending to narrate that whole thing, but like I think it's always cool when you see the original of the trope. You know?
Yeah, it was really cool. Yeah, because I kept being like, surely it can't be that guy because he's dead. But no, like you see his face at the very beginning, and that was like, So I did really enjoy that. And then I watched a whole bunch of films for this, unlike last week.
Makes a change.
Ellie? I have been watching, so very interesting timing. We just on a complete whim watched Our Friends in the North, which is like the mid-90s British TV drama starring Christopher Eccleston and Daniel Craig.
Oh, I know why you watched
Mark Strong.
I remember
Gina McKee.
your Christopher Eccleston stan.
It's not, he's not as hot as he is in Shallow Grave, but because every episode is set in a different year. There's 9 episodes and they take place from the 1960s to the 1990s and the characters change a lot. So he's like pretty ordinary to begin with, but then he becomes like an anarchist journalist by episode 3 and he's got like
us. We're good. That's
yeah, exactly. He's got like long hair and a big crazy handlebar mustache and it's kind of a good wild look for him. But it was just like a complete coincidence that we happened to be watching it. The first episode is set in 1964 and it's Harold Wilson is about to win the general election for Labour for the first time in like 15 years. And you know, that was made in the mid-90s before Tony Blair came in as a Labour Prime Minister for the first time since Margaret Thatcher took over. And we're watching it just before Rishi Sunak loses his job. So it's like, you know, ripples through time. And like very convenient, like also sad and grim, right? Because it's kind of about the kind of broken promises of like Britain's left-wing politics and how it's like, you know, rife with corruption and stuff like that. It was just like a coincidence that it came out in the mid-90s because the guy actually tried to get it made in the 80s because it was based on a play and he tried to get this TV adaptation of his play made in the 80s. But I think, I don't really know. I suspect the reason that it didn't get made in the 80s is because it was too close to the time it's criticizing. Like it's very critical of like the corruption in British institutions. Which again, grim, but it makes me think like, God, fucking imagine what people are going to be saying about like our times now in about 30 years, sort of films and TV shows that are going to be coming out about like lockdown and what was going on in Westminster at that time. Be unbelievably fucked.
I was thinking this earlier. Why was I thinking this? Oh, it was that little spoiler for later in the podcast. I watched Paris is Burning also for the first time this week. And I was thinking about, like, I know it was made in 1990, but it's kind of looking at the 80s and about, like, what a rich cultural period the 80s was in a way that, like, we've never really got over it. Like, that kind of Reaganite politics, Thatcherite politics, like, in both the US and the UK and the kind of counterculture and subculture that was coming up. And I was like, actually, maybe the period that is the most comparable to that is the 2010s, in that you had these huge, huge seismic shifts of, like, Brexit and like Trump and this kind of like rise of like neo-fascism. And at the same time, I think like quite an interesting counterculture in that like it's sort of leftism and anarchism is like more, and like kind of abolitionist politics is more like on the cards and in the mainstream discourse in a way that it wasn't kind of like 20 years ago. And I do wonder if like that will be sexy and cool at some point in the future.
Well, the funny thing is, like, the most interesting about the 80s is that mainstream of the 80s was so fucking corporate and shit. You know, like, if you think of, like, 80s Hollywood, actually is when you had, like, the worst type of, like, bullshit popcorn movies, you know? But actually, if you dig deep, you do have a lot of interesting stuff. So, yeah, it's like, 80s is an interesting time to dig into. And, like, obviously the politics and the music and all sorts of stuff was really interesting.
It feels like maybe comparable. Like
the 2010s, like, the biggest cultural export was, like, superhero movies and stuff like that, right? That's what people will mostly think about. LMFAO.
I think it's always so hard to tell, though, like, what you're right about, like, looking back at a decade, like, when you're so close to it. Like, I feel like I can't really pinpoint what the 2010s are yet. Like, I feel like even now I'm just trying to get a grasp on what the 90s are, you know, like, so I feel like you have to be like at least a decade out to like crystallize it, you know.
Think about it.
Even the fashion, like it feels like quite hard to tell you what the fashion is, but once you see the fashion 10 years later, you say, oh my god, that was the fashion.
I can absolutely tell, especially the early 2010s.
You can now, but like
at the time,
someday it'll come back, right? Like the big horn-rimmed glasses and the tartan shirts and the hipster look from the early 2010s.
Fit and flare dresses.
Yeah,
I had so many of those. The Zooey Deschanel era.
But then it's always funny because there's people who hold on to that. So people who are in their 40s are still dressing like that a little bit. Like I'm probably guilty of it. I probably dress a little bit like that sometimes. But like, you know, like
fit and flare dress.
That's what I mean. So it's like, well, no, I'm thinking more the plaid shirts and the horn glasses. But like, so I don't know. It's like,
just give it 10, 20 years.
I don't know. I feel like it's very, looking back and stuff and makes everything a lot clearer for me. Like, it's like at the time, it's probably why like it's hard to like identify with your time, you know, is that you don't have the nostalgia for it yet.
No. But I guess, I am starting to, I think we're getting further and further enough away from the 2010s that I'm like, I actually think it will be quite like a rich seam for culture to tap into in like future years, because just so much happened that maybe it will have like the same cachet that the 80s had. And
I'm looking forward to being like vindicated by hindsight, right? Because it's like it's been such a political struggle, like for a lot of different people in a lot of different ways. But like, I don't know, the injustices that we face get kind of normalized until like 20 years have passed and everyone looks back at it and was like, how fucked up was that? It's like, I know. It's what we're trying to tell you.
I was that.
Anyway, that's a little political tangent. I don't know where we're going to go on.
But like for what is
the film is called Political Biography.
Yeah, I think this is a very political episode, particularly in relation to some of the news that has come out today.
Oh, have I missed something? What happened today?
Oh, just the nonsense that Keir Starmer.
Keir Starmer saying transphobic bullshit.
Oh, well, yeah, God.
Yeah.
He's the worst. He's the fucking worst.
He's the fucking worst.
Anyway. We can't influence your vote because actually we are coming out on Thursday, so we could influence. Imagine we change the election landscape. Do not vote for Labour.
Oh yeah, I would.
But also don't vote for Tory. I don't know.
No.
Just vote for anyone else.
Yeah, like
We can swing it.
You think?
Yeah, this is it.
You think we have that kind of power?
Reform is going to charge in. all because of us.
Oh my god! Time to move on.
You're welcome, guys. Okay, Orlando, My Political Biography.
What were you watching, Jamie?
I forgot.
Talk about that?
Oh no, what was I watching? Well, I was watching Inside Out 2.
Okay. Is it good?
Which is nice. Like, I do think Inside Out is not my favourite Pixar, and I think partly because it's not as pure as the other Pixar. So the concept is actually quite complicated, and I actually wonder how kids understand what's going on, because this one's about a kid going through puberty. Now, when do you know what puberty is? Do you know what puberty is when you're 5? I'm not too sure.
No.
And would you know what anxiety is when you're 5? Like, are 5-year-olds anxious? I don't know.
Probably these days,
but not consciously. Anyway, it's like being a teenager, and these new emotions, more complex emotions, come in from so in the first film, it's like very simple. It's like your anger, fear, disgust, joy, and sadness. Is that the 5? And now come what comes in? It's like anxiety. Maya Hawke's, who's hilarious in this film, as anxiety. But then you've got like
isn't jealousy or like envy?
Envy's one. There's ennui, which is very, very funny. All these more complex.
Is ennui French?
Ennui's French.
Yes.
She's played by I always forget her name. She's got a very kind of Greek-sounding name. Adele Exarchopoulos. Yes, she's so funny. There's a great moment where the main character, she's meet these kind of cool girls, and she's all anxious, and it's like, oh my god, what do I do with my hands? And she's trying to walk with them like this, and anxiety saying, no, you look stupid. And Ennui's like, what do you think pockets are for? She just walks around with her hands in her pockets. It's really funny. But yeah, it's a good film. It's like a film where if you think about what's going on, it doesn't make sense. Like there's a lot of kind of daft puns. Like there's when someone she learns what sarcasm is as a teenager, and a sarcasm opens up in the brain, and somebody has to
sarcasm.
So they have to cross the chasm. Like it's like that kind of thing. It's doesn't quite make sense. It's just but it's quite inventive. It's one of the better Pixar sequels, I would say.
Have you seen, just interesting because you're talking about not knowing whether or not kids would really get this, have you seen Soul?
Yeah, Soul's definitely the more kind of adult one, I would say.
It was just so interesting that Pixar went on to make a film about like feeling like you've wasted your life, which is the least relatable thing to a child. But like, I don't know, I was all here for it. I'm here for Pixar kind of like making a more like broad, like it doesn't have to be so like family friendly all the time. Like it can be more specific to certain experiences.
Yeah, I mean, there were kids in my screening and they seemed to enjoy it. They were laughing along. So maybe I'm just like underestimating the kids. But like, I don't know. It just doesn't seem to me a much more complex idea than, you know, your toys come alive or that rat is making some pasta. You know, it's a bit more. It's like about emotions, which I don't know when you become aware of emotions. I mean, you barely have emotions when you're a kid, aren't you? You're just all id. You're just like a little monster. So. When do kids become nice? I don't know.
Kids like cry and scream all the time, right? I imagine that's kind of emotive.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like
kids have feelings, Jamie.
Maybe I was just a horrible kid. I don't know.
Who can say? Who can say? I like that you've managed to alienate probably all of the left voters. Well, not the left voters, the liberal voters and children.
That's our main demographic.
Yeah. Oh no.
So now just old right-wing people is all we have left.
Fucking no.
I mean, let's face it.
And the left. The left we still have. The left is on board.
Orlando, My Political Biography. So this is the directorial debut of philosopher Paul B. Preciado, and it explores his and other trans people's experience through the lens of Virginia Woolf's celebrated 1928 novel Orlando, which follows the adventures of a poet who changes sex from man to woman and goes on to live for centuries. So Preciado's film takes the form of a series of vignettes, some of them dramatic, some comic, in which an assortment of trans and non-binary performers play different incarnations of Orlando. It's a film that's hard to categorise, given the way it slyly blends fact and fiction, documentary and fantasy, and mixes literary criticism with philosophical theory. Which is part of the point. This is a truly trans film in terms of its content and form. Anna Heat, what did you make of this very interesting film?
Yeah, I think I admire this film and I'm fascinated by its project more than I think it's entirely successful on every level. But I'm really, really glad it exists. I think it's just like such a curious like object. I really, really love the idea of the way that Preciado takes this book that is itself not a biography, right? Like Orlando is kind of this suffix of it, whatever you say. It's called a biography, but it's not. It's like a fiction. And that's already been subverting this idea of biography and turns it into a collective biography for an entire group of people. I think it's just like really, really fascinating. And to do it with Orlando especially is such a perfect idea, which is a book that is like so slippery and elusive and is already about like blurring the boundaries between what it means to be performing something or someone and what it means to be something or someone, and like what is the distinction between those two things, and is there a distinction between those two things, and is about kind of gender as both identity and desire. They talk a lot in this film about how Virginia Woolf wrote it for her like female lover Vita Sackville West, and so it already has this kind of like eroticism like underlying through it, and kind of Preciado brings that out in this film, and it's just like really, really fascinating in that way. It looks really beautiful, really eclectic. I love that every single character that is going to play Orlando wears a little ruff. I think that's like super cute. Very, very sexy. It is really messy, I think, at points. And that's, I guess, what I mean by like I admire the idea behind it more than the execution necessarily, because there was like an element of it that it felt like a little bit repetitive. That it's kind of the same bit, right? That it's someone and they come dressed as like Orlando, and then they're kind of like telling their story, and some of the stories are like more interesting than others. But then you also have these really, really good like group scenes that are really like inventive, where a doctor comes out and calls for Orlando, and it's kind of all of them are Orlando. And I like really, really love that. I also really, really love the bits in this film where you can see like the edges of the filmmaking. So almost like what would normally be in a blooper reel. There's this point where like Preciado comes out and he's like giving like directorial instruction of like, oh no, say it like this or do it like this. And then the person kind of drops their like performance and it's like, oh, okay. And then you can kind of see them getting ready again. And it's this kind of idea of the edges of filmmaking and of creation, and the way that that's kind of mirroring the edges of gender, and the way that like the process of becoming someone is the point. There's like a really interesting idea in this film about, you know, that the idea of like transness and queerness, that the process is the point of it, and the process is like part of that identity. It isn't just about kind of like in Orlando, like waking up and suddenly being another person, that the transition is the point and is part of like your journey and who you are. And it's not about kind of, it's its own identity and its own kind of way of existing within the world and relating to people. And I think by kind of showing the way that the film is also doing that, I know, I just thought there were like so many like really interesting ideas in it. So I did really, I love it. I'm so glad it exists. I think it's like really beautiful, really inventive. He is a really good writer. And I kind of wish more of his writing was in it. But yeah, like I gave it, well, we'll talk about Letterboxd ratings in a bit, but it felt like a very, very solid film that isn't a masterpiece. And I feel there could be a masterpiece in there somewhere, if that makes sense.
I also wondered if some of his writing was in there, because like there's like bits where the characters will be like telling their story, but then it will also bleed into like they're just clearly reading Virginia Woolf. But then, but also, could they be reading his stuff? It's not exactly sure how much of this was improvised or scripted, or you know, these characters have been prompted or workshopped. So yeah, like because I mean, it almost just maybe because of French, because I feel like French people are just inherently seem smarter than you know, like if you interview
so true.
If you interviewed a bunch of like British like teenagers who were like transitioning, you wouldn't like get such.
Yeah, that one kid that was 15, it was so eloquent.
Yeah.
Bitch.
Yeah. So like but it may just be they are incredibly eloquent and they chose them because they're really smart and like have thought deeply about this transition they're going through. So yeah, I don't know. Like but yeah, I just wondered how much of it was scripted. But anyway,
I agree. Like I really, really enjoyed it. It is a very nebulous film. There's just so much going on. And in a way, it's almost kind of intimidating how ambitious the scope of the film is. Like, it's having all these trans people who are all from different walks of life sharing their experiences and finding their commonalities. Also, like, you know, showing their emotional range as performers, both, you know, they're high and low. And at the same time, they're all trying to discourse with Virginia Woolf. So it is really ambitious, but I did kind of like just chill my brain out by being like, okay, so the actual underlying structure is quite uncomplicated. It is just a film that is trying at every corner to be as non-binary as possible, to kind of like defy any kind of structure. It is both an adaptation of a classic novel and a documentary about current issues. It played very straight, but also there are scenes that break the fourth wall. Our performers are wearing Elizabethan ruffs, but they're also wearing Reeboks with trackies and stuff like that, you know? The testimonies come from trans people from the ages of, like, I think the youngest are like children, and there's people who are like 70, there's like pensioners. And the diversity and amount of these performers, I think, help the film succeed in its political goals. But, you know, there are performers there who are working to make it, you know, fun and quite celebratory and sometimes sexy. There's a point where, yeah, like a bunch of Orlandos take HRT together as like drugs at a party or something like that. And it's like a very joyful scene. And it also, like, there's archival footage of Christine Jorgensen, who's the first high-profile person to undergo gender-affirming surgery around the time of Virginia Woolf's life. I think that the newspaper clipping that always goes viral is that it describes her as like an ex-GI is now a blonde bombshell or something like that. And then it all comes to a head in this very kind of like moving scene that speculates on the idea of a like legal abolition of gender, like that, this very like liberating utopian like scene. So like there is a lot on offer, and I think for that reason it doesn't really allow for a casual viewing. I think that it's throwing a lot at you, and a lot of it is good and interesting and honest, so you do want to keep up, and I think you'll be rewarded if you keep up. But that's not to say that like it is like a mind-blowing masterpiece. I think that some of the scenes feel a little underfurnished maybe, and you're right, Annie, with going over the same ground with different performers, it can feel a little bit like some time is wasted, or there's opportunities we're not fully exploring. But I mean, I was quite fascinated with its, you know, intellectual goals, and then also found myself having quite like a strong emotional investment in it. So I enjoyed it. I had a really good time. Yeah, I really liked this. I thought it was truly inventive. Like something like quite rarely you actually see a film that's doing stuff differently. And I know it's like he's like building on like Chris Marker and other kind of like essay documentarians, and you know there's a bit of like, you know, there's a bit of a Boulevard in there, there's a bit of Pasolini in there, there's a bit of Godard in there, but like it was truly doing things I hadn't seen before, and I thought it was really playful and brainy,
and explored these questions about gender identity in just really fascinating ways. It was just, a swirl of ideas, and totally refreshing compared to the toilet discussions we have on, in the newspapers and on TV. It's like, I think the fact he just gets a bunch of really articulate, cool trans people to just talk about their lives was actually kind of a revelation. Like you realize like actually how often this discourse does not involve trans people. Was really great, and he has found like such a lovely, like articulate bunch of people. Like they're all, I mean, you can pick out your favorites. Like I love the kind of like, there's a couple of like total old biddies, Orlando's who are like lovely. Like one, I actually can't remember her name, but she's just trying to like book into a hotel, and she like, because of her passport, and they wouldn't let her in because it doesn't match. Just like they were just great characters. I do wonder though if I would have got more out of the film if I had read Orlando. Have you read Orlando?
I fucking love Orlando. Yeah. One of the most stunning passages ever written in English is in Orlando, which is that bit where it's like I think he falls asleep, and then it's this description of him like waking up to like the industry of like, and it's like I think the 18th century had arrived, and it's like so fucking good. It is like such a remarkable piece of writing. It's so, oh my God, she's so great. I think Virginia Woolf is one of those people that you're like, oh yeah, okay, the classics, and you read her and you're like, fuck my life.
So that's what I feel like. Actually, I was missing a little bit of that, because it actually made it a little bit confusing, because a couple of times during the film I was quite lost, because you've got one of the trans characters, one of the Orlandos, talking about their life, and then just seamlessly starts talking about like being in Constantinople or like traveling the seven seas, and it's like, hold on, what's going on here? Oh, they're actually talking about Orlando the character, and that slippage is kind of seamless. And I think, I was thinking, am I just not paying good enough attention? But then it happened several times, and it's clearly on purpose. Like the slippage between these real characters and the fictional character is like definitely on purpose, and he's playing with that all the way throughout, and that's the point of the film. But I feel like if I knew like Virginia Woolf's writing better, I could spot when it's slipping over more easily.
Have you seen the film, the Sally Potter
I haven't
film?
seen the Sally Potter film.
Beautiful.
Yeah, so I haven't read any Virginia Woolf. I know like a little bit of biography and stuff, and very clearly great influential writer and fascinating life. But like, I feel like maybe I was just missing a little sort of degree of like knowledge.
Have you seen The Hours?
I have seen The Hours, yeah.
The Hours is so fucking good. Yeah. I remember reading A Room of One's Own. That was like also really, this has nothing to do with this film, but about Virginia Woolf. And that kind of like reception, or that like received understanding that you have of A Room of One's Own, especially if you're like a female writer. It's like, oh, I need like a dinky little garret to like write in. Like you need a room of one's own. And she like talks the whole way through. She's like, no, like women need money. And if you don't have money, and if there isn't an economic system to prop you up that can like furnish you with your own independence, then like creativity can't happen. And it's actually worse. Like white women have it easier. And it's like, and it was so like, fuck. Like she just knew this stuff and she was writing this stuff. And it kind of become this very like reified into this like very charming like Bloomsbury, oh, the Bohemians just think you need like a little attic room, and it's like so fucking political. She's so great. I love her.
And then Preciado, you've read his stuff?
I have not. Shunlin, friend of the podcast, read, is it Testo Junkie that he wrote, and like sent bits of it to me, and it was like crazy good. But I've never read the whole thing. He's written like a few things for Fitzcarraldo, I think, as well. I should, but I've not.
He seems pretty sharp. And like, I just loved the kind of like the kind of intellectual leaps he would do between scenes, and like, it's interesting because he clearly loves the text, but he's also kind of like arguing a little bit with the text as well. And I like that back and forth. So it's a very cool film. You got to keep your wits about you though. I feel like it's a smart film, but that's good. Like it's a film that challenges you a little bit as well.
Yeah, for sure. Another good cinema film, I would say, in that it would help you pay attention to it. I think it's a film that deserves attention.
That said, I watched this one at home, and a lot of the costuming and like the really fun cinematography is kind of what was helping keep me along for some of those denser moments. Like I don't know, like you're right, because I've not read. I don't think I've read all of Orlando. I've read bits of it, so I recognized the writing of the frozen lake scene. But then other points where I was like, if I can't tell where we're moving into Virginia Woolf and where we're not moving into Virginia Woolf. Just the mise en scène and the fun little backdrops they have, and the way that they're just, it's on a pretty shoestring budget, but like, it feels like a lot of fun to make. It feels like they've gotten in people who are very passionate about what they're doing here. Totally. So,
and it's funny, like it's got funny scenes. It's like there's a kind of dance disco sequence, which is great. Did you just have a favorite Orlando? Did you say?
I loved the kid, the 15-year-old kid.
Is that Ruben? Was it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
Like very kind of cherub looking.
Like, baby. Yeah.
Very
loved
cute.
that.
Yeah. And the dog. There's like a dog who's also in Orlando.
Wearing a ruff.
Like,
Yeah.
It's fun. So we should do a letterbox. Because since Peter's not here, the tyrant, we can do it.
I bet if we asked Peter politely, he'd be like, "Yeah, I don't give a fuck."
Yeah, we should be clear that like it's not like we do queer films every time Peter's not around. I feel like we should make it clear that it's not like he's not letting us do queer. He's forcing us to not do.
I thought you were talking about the fact that we do the letterbox ranking now instead of at the end, but also that.
Yeah, like the last time he wasn't around, we were doing pride films, and now we're doing trans films, and it's like blink twice if he won't let you talk about this stuff. But we can't because it's a podcast.
Exactly. What other subjects should we do that when Peter's not here we can plan ahead? What?
This is so close to the libel. It's so close.
No, Peter's an ally. He's a good guy. But yeah, letterbox. Let's do it.
4.
4 from Ellie.
I would say 3.5.
Okay. I'm gonna say 4.5. I thought just for the visual invention and the technique is doing something brand new, I think, while watching it, and like that's like invention is like underrated, so like also makes the maths easier because it's 4.
Yes, so true. So important.
Okay, on to Unicorns. Unicorns is a tender drama that sees a burly single dad motor mechanic called Luke get entangled in the life of a sparky British Indian drag queen called Aisha and gets drawn into her world. Ben Hardy plays Luke. Jason Patel plays Aisha, who goes by Asik when they're out of drag, and the film is co-directed by Sally El Husseini and James Krishna Floyd. El Husseini is probably best known for 2012's My Brother the Devil, which actually starred Floyd, so there's some link between this film and that film, in that it concerned a queer South Asian character with Julie Dentes. Ellie, we'll start with you. What did you think of this one?
I did enjoy this film. I didn't and still don't really like fully, I think, understand its intentions. And I don't know if that's the fault of the film or the fault of me as a reader, but like the opening shot of the film looks kind of gritty. It is like two people just having sex in a field quite anonymously as like day breaks on an industrial city in the background.
Are we in an Andrew Arnold film?
I kind of was like, I went in like knowing very little other than that this was going to be a film about a straight mechanic who comes to question his sexuality. I didn't know if it was going to be a realist film, kind of like God's Own Country, or, if it was going to be the opposite direction where it was like much more dark and like femme. So I went in not really knowing, and then was kind of blown back by the very kind of convenient, slightly action-packed narrative. I mean, this guy goes to the toilet in like an Indian restaurant and then finds a magic door to an underground drag rave, and it's like that's insane. That would never happen in real life. You wouldn't just simply walk into something like this. But it's very fast-paced. It's a very like strong, sudden sexual fantasy where this guy just like casually walks in, like has a weird blindsided look around, and then the hottest girl in there walks up, almost immediately asks if he wants to make out. I mean, she pulls like a glowing vape out of her tits. Like it's very like, it's very like lurid. And then after we hit the ground running with that like very forward opening, it kind of retreats back into this like Driving Miss Daisy sort of transactional situationship where they're helping each other out, and that itself becomes like this friends to lovers thing. So yeah, it's like more like a romance film in the kind of like very impermeable sense of reality that the romance genre tends to have. But it is like beautifully shot. I was really enjoying that. The cinematography is great. Lots of like very, I don't know, like intimate close-ups. The environments are great. We see like this council flat that is cluttered in a very believable way. The mechanic works in this garage, which is like next to a horse stable for some reason with wire fencing. And it's just like, it's so familiar. It's so much like scenes you would actually see within like British working class life, and they feel so detailed as well. But in that sort of film genre way, I think when it comes to the writing, everyone can feel a little bit like a stereotype of themselves, like not even getting into the relationship between Luke and Aisha, like the straight lad and the drag queen who's like bringing into question his perception about the world. But like the wee kid who he's like single parenting is like, I want mummy to take me to Disneyland. And it's like, you could not write a line that is more like, be heartbroken because this is a bad relationship than that, right?
Did you call it the kid's name?
I didn't get what was the kid's name?
Jamie.
Oh, Jamie, yeah. So it was.
Representation.
But like, yeah, I mean, that whole... when you kind of zoom out and look at the actual plot beats themselves, they're a little fantastical, right? That whole like, we locked eyes at a party and now you're like my bodyguard, slow burn, AU, 60,000 words fanfic. Like it's sometimes so indulgent. But I mean, I do think what makes it work and what made it an enjoyable film for me was the fact that the central characters are just so cute. Like the Ben Hardy plays Luke, and he's doing that thing in God's Own Country, the Josh O'Connor thing, where he's just so tough and closed off and offers such little glimpses of his vulnerability, but we still are able to know that they're there. And then Jason Patel's character Aisha is like, you know, really annoying, but in quite an adorable way. She's like really like feisty and confrontational, but then also like goes through a lot, and we see a lot of depth from Jason Patel's performance. And it's that thing where it's like, you know, the writing sometimes I think hands them maybe eye-rolling turns of fate, really. Like sometimes the twists are a little bit teleplay-y, but do really, really good things with what they do. So it's like a little indulgent melodrama, a little bit sensational, a couple cliches, and not the most transformative screenwriting. But I think that when it comes to genre like this, whether it's like romance or, you know, like a horror film like we were watching last week, or a science fiction film or whatever, I think the audiences are fine with retreading familiar tropes or even kind of unrealistic tropes, so long as it's done well. And it is done well. Like the film looks great and the actors are clearly like putting a lot into their performances. And yeah, I was pretty happy to like sit with them and go through this journey and see how it all turned out.
Right.
It's not that I disagree. I think I agree with all of your points. I think just the negatives of it maybe outweighed the positives of it for me. But I agree that the characters are good. I think the performances are really like held together, like hold the whole film together.
I agree.
Like really, really great. I actually thought the sex scenes were really good. I thought they like the way that the film thinks about like desire is, well, not even thinks about it, just the way that it portrays it was like really interesting. Like you say, there's this kind of like grittiness to it, like this kind of marriage of like grittiness and romance that I thought was like really, that's kind of what you need for a sex scene, and was like really, really well done. I just found it didn't really say anything particularly interesting, I suppose. Like it kind of felt like, okay, yeah, kind of quote unquote white working class culture can be homophobic. Muslim culture can be homophobic. Oh no. Kind of felt like the vibe. I was like, I don't know, I feel like we've already trodden this ground. I feel if you want to sort of be working within those frameworks, I never saw this film, so like this is just classic me just like chatting shit, but like even the concept of the film Femme, which I never saw, but I really do want to see, it looks really good, had a kind of grittiness to it, like that he had like beat up this guy and now they were kind of there's a sort of tension there that isn't just like, oh, people across like the cultural divide. And I think coming from one side of the cultural divide, I am tired of the cultural divide being shown in this way. Like it just feels a bit like, yeah, we've kind of been here before, and it doesn't feel that inventive or interesting to me thematically. That being said, I thought that the bits where it was like just them and it was kind of like this intimacy between them, that was like done really, really well. So like the performances were really good. The chemistry was good. But otherwise, it just felt quite like, yeah, like you say, quite soapy. And there are certain twists and turns in it that I found that again, is a very personal thing. But I just think we need to not be telling stories, especially about immigrants in the UK, within these particular ways. I think there are more interesting ways to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I probably, you're right there. I think it is a little bit out of date, the film as well. Like, I think if it was made 10, 20 years ago, it might have had a different reaction. You know, like, you know, the idea of like a you know, like a mechanic falling for a drag queen doesn't seem that revolutionary now, you know, like I feel like it's like been done. But I think for me, I mean, this might disagree a little bit with you. Like I felt like the fact it was set within this kind of Indian or kind of South Asian drag scene was actually quite interesting and something I hadn't seen before. I thought that was actually quite different. And I feel like, I know what you mean, like the family's a little bit of a cliche. But, you know, I think it's just one family. We don't really see much beyond that kind of wider circle, but we do see this kind of like really interesting like South Asian party scene, like
that bit was cool,
which is kind of interesting, and it's like it's suggesting that actually, you know, if you leave your small town, I mean, we know it's Manchester, it's not that a small town, but
the small town of Greater Manchester,
that town that's famously so homophobic. You can never find a queer scene in Manchester, but like you know, but like the idea that there actually you can make a life outside of your family and find this kind of like really vibrant scene within your own community, I thought it was quite interesting and something I hadn't seen before. And yeah, I thought the performances were really tender. I thought it was quite humanistic. I thought I think Ben Hardy's really good, surprisingly good. You know, like since I've only seen him in that really bad X-Men film.
Yes, yeah. I kept trying to be like, where have I seen this boy before?
He plays Archangel in one of the X-Men films. I can't remember. And he's also a kind of alumnus of EastEnders, I believe.
That's very
He's
sweet.
like Ian Beale's son or something.
He did 189 episodes of EastEnders.
Yeah. Is he Ian Beale's son? Which is
Peter Beale, which I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. He was also like in Mary Shelley and Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah,
he's like a kind of collection of just like sort of indie-ish films.
Yeah, he plays plays the drummer and who's the drummer queen called? I can't remember. Anyway, he plays him.
Who can say? I can't say. Like literally, I have no.
The drummer of Queen is Roger Taylor.
Oh my god!
Yes, Roger Taylor.
That's queer representation.
Roger Taylor. Where was I? But anyway, I thought he was actually excellent. I thought like very good, and I think Jason Patel, while less polished, I thought was really sparky and lively on screen. Like I couldn't take my eyes off them. They were like so good. And yeah, so I think they kind of like carried the film. Like I feel like you're right. Like the script is a little bit soapy, a little bit like melodramatic. Some of the turns are a bit silly, but I was like swept up in their little romance, you know, and like I did enjoy spending time with them as they drove to Birmingham with like a bunch of like screaming queens in the back seat, like all slagging. Like I loved those scenes. Like I thought there was like some really nice moments in the whole film. And yeah, I feel like and I thought it was quite a balance as well. I thought when we started watching it, I thought it was all going to be from the white guy's point of view, and I thought it was going to be quite dull. But actually, the film was quite balanced in that respect. And actually, you could argue that his the white guy's life, like back in Essex, is not very interesting. Maybe we could have had less of that, and maybe had more of the kind of like underground, like South Asian kind of party scene. I think that'd be like a much more fun place to stay. But yeah, I thought it was pretty good. I really enjoyed it actually, despite its faults, which are kind of pretty obvious. But
I do think it's one of those ones where it will be like people will like it or not like it, and that's just going to be like quite a subjective thing because it is a film that has like very like you're right, very like definable issues in it, right? So I think that like it's a case of it's got those high highs but also low lows, so people will take away all sorts of different things from this. But I liked it. I had a good time. I think I went in with very low expectations is the thing, especially because I'd just seen Orlando. And there was this is totally irrelevant, but there was a film that I wanted to get for the segment we're about to do next, and I couldn't get it, and I was really frustrated because it was going to be such a good film, and I was going to really enjoy watching it, but I couldn't get it, so I was really frustrated. I was like, I guess I'll just like go and watch. I'll go and watch Unicorns, and I went and like kind of pissed off. So I think that's the thing as well, that the film
What's the film?
Well, we're going to be talking about trans films, and I really wanted to talk about The People's Joker, which is a 2022 parody superhero film, an unofficial adaptation of like DC Comics that placed the filmmaker who is a trans woman as the Joker, and it has
that's so funny.
It has Tim Heidecker and Bob Odenkirk, and it has like these, but it never got released because DC were like, you can't do that. Like you just can't do that. And I like searched high and low. But I think unless you go to one of its very little underground screenings in the US, you're not going to see it. And I was so annoyed because that thing was the second I learned that you couldn't see it, I was like, now everything I learned about it sounds much more cool. It's like forbidden.
It's like, what is it? That and the Roadrunner film?
Yeah.
The films they don't want you to see.
Exactly. But I think part of that as well, like I did go in with quite low expectations because I hadn't really heard much about this. It was like, I think it premiered at Toronto last year and there wasn't tons of buzz about it. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was like...
I'll be keeping an eye on the actors, I think, is the thing. Like, I'd love to see more of them.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's well directed. Like, it's a really beautiful film. Like, yeah, it works. Works for me. Letterboxd scores. What are we going to do here?
I gave it 2.5.
Okay. I'll give it 3.5.
Okay, I'll give it 3 then. Again, for like easy maths. But also I think three for me is like, I'm recommending this. I would say, if you like the sound of this, you'll probably like this.
I do think this film is kind of like a 3. It's like...
Yeah, but it's not doing anything new or different. You know, it's doing what it's doing in a very nice way, I think.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
And being nice is fine. You know, I think.
All right.
We can't all be 5 stars. So, given that this week's films have concerned gender non-conforming characters, we thought we'd take a look at trans and gender fluid cinema. That's quite a loose theme, so I have no idea where we're going to take this, but let's have a go. Anahit, can you kick us off?
Yeah, so I kind of, when this theme came up, I was like, fuck, I actually don't have that many examples. I haven't really watched like that much around like this kind of genre or this kind of theme. The one that came to mind was Sean Baker's Tangerine, which is very, very cool, which is about like these 2 trans sex workers on, is it New Year's Eve or Christmas Day?
Christmas Eve.
It's Christmas Eve, yeah. And it kind of is following them around LA, and it's like really classic, like Sean Baker, and it's like absolute fucking chaos, but like a great deal of empathy. So I love that film. But then I was kind of like, I should take this opportunity to maybe... It's not great that I haven't seen that many. So I watched Jenny Livingston's Paris is Burning because it was on Mubi and it is 77 minutes, which is the dream. And it's this really incredible documentary around the ballroom scene in kind of like late 80s New York. And it's looking at kind of set in Harlem, kind of these like that Black community, the Latin community, and the sort of ballroom drag queer scene that they're sort of fostering. And it has like these talking head interviews as well as like just documenting the different forms of like expression that come out of it. So there's a great deal in it about like voguing and how like voguing was a way of kind of this almost like non-violent form of like competition or like creative competition. It was just like really, really interesting. I really, really loved it. I think I've maybe seen excerpts of it before because it seemed quite familiar in places. And there's this really like warm kind of construction of these places where they have like houses and there are like house mothers, and I'll like interview the house mothers, and they're usually these like drag queens that have a lot of experience. They're like taking care of. It's really that idea that is like quite central to a lot of queer storytelling, that idea of like the found family. And it's really like concretizing that within like a family structure and a house structure, which I thought was like really, really beautiful. And we were talking, was it recorded? Yeah, it was recorded when we were talking about the 80s. We had press record at that point. But I just find like that period of kind of counterculture and like political culture really, really interesting. That it was, we think of it, you see films like this and it feels so liberated in a way that almost like today we wouldn't have. And then you think that this was coming up in response to like really institutionalized homophobia, the AIDS crisis. And it reminds me a lot, not necessarily in terms of form, but in just like the themes that it's approaching, like Nan Goldin's All the Beauty and the Bloodshed. Like it's kind of documenting those same sort of communities. And I just think that's something really, really beautiful in especially the culture that was coming out of New York in that point, that there was this mass death that was actively like encouraged by the state. And you had this resistance to it that took place as like community and as care, and just this big like fuck you. And I just think that's really cool. So yeah, I would really, really recommend it. I don't know if it's on Mubi for much longer. I can't remember if it was one of the ones that said was leaving. Maybe part of their it's the Pride season. So okay, maybe. Yeah. But it was on there like 2 days ago when I watched it. So I feel like maybe when I first saw this, it was on YouTube as well.
Yeah, that's what I'm looking at. Really?
It's like I think I don't know if it's got a different...
It is currently on YouTube.
There we go then. So. Yeah. And it's 77 minutes. I cannot stress that enough. Like, it's such a nice, like, easy watch, and just feels very, like in that world for, like, just over an hour.
Yeah. I can also wonder, like, what would it be like to watch it in 1990? Because I feel like, you know, we're so used to, like, you know, RuPaul's Drag Race is, like, everywhere now. Like, I feel like this is, like, so much in the mainstream now that back then it must have been, like, a revelation to see this.
Yeah. Where there's these bits of it where they're, like, looking at drag and the way that they're kind of talking or explaining something, and it now sounds so familiar. And kind of like I was saying with the Sunset Boulevard thing, like that way that when you come back to the beginning of culture and you've lived in culture now in a way that's kind of, you have these mimicries of it throughout, and you're like, oh, this is where it was. And you can't almost place yourself back in that mindset where it would have been so revolutionary. But yeah, it was really cool. Like a really interesting way of thinking about, like, especially in relation to like unicorns or whatever, that idea of like gender fluidity, and Orlando actually as well, as both something that is about identity but is also about performance, right? And the fact that it is performance doesn't make it any less of an identity, that it's kind of breaking apart that signification of like performance as fake or as inauthentic. And I think that's like a really interesting avenue to kind of dig into when thinking about this stuff. Anyway, yeah, I really liked it.
It's a really good film. Yeah.
We agree.
Great.
5 out of 5 for that one.
Yeah.
Ellie?
So I decided to get a bit weird with it. So The Naked Civil Servant was a made for ITV movie in 1975. It was John Hurt, isn't it? Won a BAFTA for his starring role as Quentin Crisp, the socialite whose memoir is the basis of this adaptation. So it might not appear like an obvious choice for a trans or gender fluid film, because if you look it up, Crisp was kind of like he embodied the 20th century British ideal of the homosexual man. He was born in 1908, and when he was young, he was like a rent boy. He would walk down the streets of like 20s, 30s London in makeup with dyed hair. He would get like a lot of verbal abuse, a lot of physical abuse. He would like go out into the blackouts of the Blitz to like pick up GIs. And he only really became well known because he wrote this memoir detailing his lifestyle, which at the time would have been really, really remarkable, right? So the film would have been broadcast to audiences who themselves would never have like really met a gay man. So the film itself can feel a little like it's treating, you know, an ordinary gay man's life as a specimen under a microscope, because it's not that mind-blowing when you look at it nowadays. But it presumes nothing about gay men for that reason. Like Crisp's parents and doctor in the film, they're really worried that this like young man is just spending his time doing nothing but primping in front of the mirror. So they send him the one place that'll set him straight, art college, because there are no crystallized stereotypes about gay men at this point, right? And you sort of realize you're watching Quentin Crisp's memoir in which he crystallizes those stereotypes. He is the definite article. So, you know, the film is just this profile of homosexuality as this other thing, built on a pretty good John Hurt performance. But it does transform, to me at least, when you learn more about Crisp's life after the film came out. So he was at odds with the queer community that came out afterwards of the 80s and 90s. He was one of those like highly individualistic, like a raconteur who had essentially built his career on being like a scandalous bitch, right? So you can kind of think of like the old guard gay men who themselves are not politically correct, and he had actually said like a lot of really like miserable things about the AIDS crisis. He would eventually reconcile with the LGBT community, which he had been very separate from, when he made one of his final public appearances as the guest of honor at Scotland's second ever Pride event.
Oh, wow.
And in his final ever interview, like the year he died at the age of 90, he said that having reflected, he probably wasn't a gay man after all, but was a trans woman. And he did not denote a change of name or pronouns, and he said that he hoped that gay men would still accept him as one of their own, but he'd asserted that if the medical technology and if the social technology of transitioning had been available to him when he was younger, he would have taken it and like lived an inconspicuous, modest life as a passing woman. And keeping that in mind while you watch this biopic is really interesting, because it's like, you know, if you assume that their labeling of him as homosexual, or even his labeling of himself as homosexual, is kind of incomplete as a label, then you do come to realize that like his male homosexuality is as defined by him wearing makeup and painting his nails as it is, or even more than, with his relationship with other men. Like, we're talking about like Orlando, something that I liked about Orlando was that it did a really good job of depicting the evolution of the medical technology of transitioning. But the social technology of transitioning has progressed, right? We have more robust language that allows people to define themselves to others more clearly. And it just makes it really interesting to me that, like, assuming that Quentin Crisp had maybe like changed his name or pronouns at the end of his life, right? Well, you would assume that that film, being a film production which had finished wrapping and was released 20 years prior, couldn't change as well, right? A film is a static record of the subject. But it's so easy for us, because of this improved social technology of transitioning, to recontextualize the kind of queerness, if queerness indeed has kinds of queerness, that it is trying to depict. So it's just really interesting. Like, it could be a film ostensibly about a gay man, but because of Crisp's own comments, because remember, he's the only real author of his own memoir, that it could also be a film about a trans woman.
Yeah, I haven't seen the film. I do remember him being on TV and stuff when I was a kid. And like, I guess the point was, it wasn't the fact that he was just gay, because I think there was, even as a kid, I had a sense that people were gay on screen. Yeah. Like, it was fabulous. He was this kind of like you say, raconteur bitch who would like slag people off, and like, it was like, that's why he was a fascinating figure. And I think that's why there was a film made about him. It's not because like, being gay is not that interesting as a film. It's the fact he was a really interesting person. Yeah. It was because he was this kind of larger than life person.
Yeah, even in the film as well, and based on his memoir, like, the other gay characters we encounter, they kind of like push him out, or they're kind of intimidated or overwhelmed by him because he's so out in a way that they're not. And yet we're all using the same language. It's all homosexuality, it's all gay men, and yet they're identifying discernible differences within this community between these queer people, which is just really interesting. The idea, it's a good case for the fact that, like, trans people, non-binary people, and a lot of the terms that we use nowadays that we didn't use in the past, these constructs have always existed, and it's entirely likely that they would have just been embraced more heavily if the social technology was at the point that it is at now.
Yeah. And he wouldn't have been seen as such a kind of like figure there'd been actually no point to invite him on, because like, like, he's just be an ordinary person.
Exactly.
That way. It's like,
and in a weird way, that's sort of what he wanted as well. Yeah, he kind of wanted to have like this, or at least that's what he said just before he died. He was also one of the like people who came and spoke on like the celluloid closet and stuff like that. So he does have some clout in that regard. But, have you watched, Jamie? What have you watched?
Well, I was going to talk about one that is a little bit flawed, because I think this, you're right, Annie, there's not that many, there wasn't that tons come to mind, and part of the reason that's because there's not been that many like trans films made, and certainly not with trans directors or directors who were like sympathetic or really had a kind of nuanced approach to it. So the one I was going to pick out was like one that's, I really love this film, but I can see it's got flaws. And then I was going to pick up a one that's newer and I think is actually almost perfect. So the older one is, I think, from the early 80s. It's Robert Altman's Come Back to the Five and Dime, Jimmy Dean, which was based on a play. And it's Altman's actually one of the great directors of plays, because he actually doesn't try and hide the fact it's a play. Sometimes people try and open it out and sort of expand it. He actually focuses in and makes it seem more stagey, but finds cinematic ways to tell the story. So it's a play set in two times. So it's set in 1955, just before James Dean dies, and it follows this kind of bunch of kind of teen. It's like a club, the James Dean Club. I can't remember the actual names, and the Delinquents maybe. Anyway, this group of girls and one boy who loved James Dean, and they kind of hang around this kind of Five and Dime, which is like just a grocery store where a couple of them work. And then the rest of the film takes place 20 years later on the 20th anniversary of James Dean's death. And it turns out that one of the characters who's came back has transitioned. So the boy who they used to muck around with in the 50s is now a woman. So Joe has become Joanna. And in the 50s, it's played by a guy called Mark Patton, who actually quite an interesting character. There's been a few films made about him recently. He was like a gay actor who he actually stars in the second Freddy Krueger film, Nightmare on Elm Street. And he was like, but he had a kind of really tough time about it. Like, he was treated really badly in Hollywood. And because he was like just an out actor playing gay characters on screen, and yeah, he kind of suffered for that, unfortunately. But he's great in this. And then the older version of him is played by Karen Black, who's just like this amazing 70s actor. And the whole film is full of amazing actors. So Cher has got her first performance in this.
What?
Sandy Dennis is in it. Who else? Kathy Bates is one of the characters. So like it's a really great film, really nostalgic. It's a film more about friendship actually, and about kind of time passing and melancholy. And the fact that the trans characters there is just kind of incidental and probably not like explored in a really nuanced way. But again, it's because it was made in the 1980s by a cis male director who probably didn't know how to talk about that in more kind of nuanced ways. But I think it is a very kind of sweet film. Yeah, like the actors are great. Like Karen Black is fantastic, and very sympathetic. But again, it's outdated in that way that you've got like a cis woman playing the trans character. So it's flawed, it's outdated, but actually a really great sort of beautiful film about friendship that it just happens to have a trans character in it. And it's interesting sort of thinking about just how time changes and how people can hold different identities at different times and how people can be like clouded about what their real identity is. And it kind of plays with all that. So that's a really good film that's really worth catching, I would say. But the much more sensitive and smart film about being trans is Tomboy.
Oh my God, of course.
Yeah, Celine Sciamma's film.
Yeah.
This is a really beautiful film. It's like about a young girl she's like 10, she's just pre-puberty essentially. So she's very androgynous. She passes as a boy. And actually what happens is she moves to this new town with her family and just starts playing with the kids outside. She starts playing football and they just assume she's a boy and she never corrects them. I think her name's Laura, but she invents.
I think it's like Laura. Doesn't she just call herself Laura?
Well, maybe it's Laura, but she calls herself Michael. That's like her character, or Mikhail. But yes, so she just like she doesn't correct the kids, and actually she starts to invent this kind of persona for herself, and it's just very sweet because she like it's like a kid who is not judged at all. She's just like it's like initially a couple of kids make a mistake, and then this becomes her persona for the summer. But there's a little tension because she's got to go back to school at some point where it will be revealed and like will people find out. But yeah, it's just a really lovely film about a young person who gets to be their true self without sort of judgment. And there's like lovely scenes of, this young girl exploring her gender, and she's like seems to be liberated by it. And she, she plays football with the lads. She goes swimming, but she wears like a one piece. So she she forms this kind of little penis out of like clay, and there's like real fun kind of like adventure and of like exploring her gender, which is really nice. And like there's like lovely moments between her family, like her sister finds out, and then her sister's actually excited. Oh my God, I'd love to have a big brother. And then there's like the whole kind of thing of like the sister becomes like involved in the conspiracy, and then a girl who hangs out with all the boys gets a crush on Michael or Mikhail. So again, it's like it's a really sweet film. Like it really explores it in a really delicate, interesting way. And the film never comes down on one side or the other. Like as the kid trans, it's just like a kid. It seems like a kid for a summer is free to explore who they want to be, and that is what makes it remarkable. And it's just like beautifully done, really sunny, summery. It's a great kind of summer movie, like that kind of like. And I guess that's the thing about summer as well. It's that kind of time where kids have freedom to like be away from school and do these adventures. And literally this kid does that, but also does it with their gender, and starts to like has a few months of play where they are exactly who they want to be, and then there's no judgment from it. So yeah, it's a really beautiful film. Again, it's another kind of like 80-minute wonder. Like I think Celine Sciamma is a really great director of children. Like I think like she like the films. I know people love Portrait of a Lady on Fire, but I think the films she's made about kids are much better. And she seems to understand kind of childhood quite well and gets really great performances from children. And I think this is amongst her best film, or among her best. Really sweet.
It's so good.
Non-judgmental, like very open, warm, and just like about like the possibilities of being a child and your whole life's ahead of you, and like why be boxed in by like gender? So nice. Mm-hmm. Very lovely.
Yeah, I fucking love that film. I completely forgot about it.
So that's the podcast. I think we've made a podcast, guys. Well done.
We did it.
What have we got to say next time on the Skinny? Have we got anything to say? Is there anything? Do we know what we're
I
doing
don't
yet?
think we even know what we're doing.
Absolutely.
Peter will be
not.
back, I think. So
Yeah, he'll
Is it
guide
in 2
us.
weeks?
yeah, actually, in 2 weeks' time, we will know the Edinburgh Film Festival programme. So maybe we could do our first reaction to that. It's
Yeah.
going to get announced next week. We're all very excited. There's been a few things announced already.
I cannot believe they got the new Alien. That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's crazy.
it's crazy, but like,
I mean, I'm not going to watch it, but it's crazy.
yeah, I wonder who's going to come. Like, because it's like, because really something needs to come to make it like really, because it's only a day before the national release. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, I thought the same thing until Jamie pointed this out to me.
It's
But-
not that crazy.
but you know, like, you know, how cool to be, you know, Ridley Scott or someone to come in, because it's the UK premiere, they probably will get some good guests. That is exciting. Yeah, and it's nice, you know, it's interesting because it seems like Edinburgh Film Festival is going to be a new direction. You know, like that kind of big genre film would not have been in Edinburgh in the last few years. So it's kind of interesting to see that kind of movie in amongst, you know,
Yeah.
like things like The Outrun and things like that. So that will be interesting. So we'll chat about that in the next 2 weeks, I'm sure. But yeah, apart from that, we could probably say goodbye. So, I was trying to say,
Like, let's end this.
sorry, I forgot to say, follow us on Twitter. Or email us. I don't know if MD's ever emailed us, but please email us at cine@theskinny.co.uk.
Yeah. And also go vote.
And go vote, yeah. But not for one of the dickheads. Just vote for one of the good guys. If you have a good guy in your
And good luck
in your
finding
area.
one.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Guys in your area. Oh, I wish.
yeah, that was us. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.